In a world where power dynamics often dictate the course of events, one encounter at an airport terminal would set off a chain reaction that would change lives forever. It was a moment that would reveal the stark contrast between arrogance and humility, and the inevitable return of karma. Before we dive into this gripping tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. The bustling atmosphere of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a cacophony of sounds. Suitcases rolling across the gleaming linoleum, the beeping of baggage carts, and the distant, muffled announcements of flights to far-off destinations. For 16-year-old Jalen Amir, this noise was more than just sound. It was a palpable vibration that resonated through the soles of his well-worn Jordans. In his silent world, he had mastered the art of reading unspoken words, interpreting the emotions that flickered across the faces around him. Hunched over his phone, Jalen's thumbs danced across the screen, engaged in a lively text exchange with his best friend Marcus. "Dude, you won't believe the food court here. They've got everything." A faint smile graced his lips as he adjusted the black beanie that sat low on his head, a small gesture of teenage self-consciousness. He was a lanky figure, all sharp angles and limbs that seemed to have outpaced his growth. His rich mahogany skin absorbed the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal, creating a striking contrast. Across the crowded waiting area, his father, Christopher Amir, observed him with a fierce pride. Christopher moved with an unhurried grace, a stark contrast to the frenetic energy surrounding them. Clad in a simple yet well-tailored gray suit, he exuded an air of quiet success rather than ostentation. His face bore the fine lines of a man who had experienced both struggle and triumph, a mask of calm composure that belied the power he wielded. To the casual observer, he was merely another business traveler, perhaps a mid-level executive on his way to a conference. Little did they know he was the founder and majority shareholder of Aerolux Premier, the very airline whose logo adorned the check-in counters and the massive jets parked outside the panoramic windows. Christopher had built Aerolux from the ground up, a testament to his relentless ambition and sharp business acumen. Starting with 2 leased planes and a dream, he had transformed Aerolux into a major player in the aviation industry, renowned for its impeccable service and luxurious amenities. Today, however, they were flying commercial, a deliberate choice, a lesson in humility that Christopher often imparted to Jalen. "Never forget where you came from," he would say, his voice a low rumble. "The world is vast, and you need to see all of it, not just the view from the top." As they sat in the crowded terminal, surrounded by a spectrum of humanity, tired travelers, excited families, anxious flyers, Jalen remained engrossed in his phone, oblivious to the woman who had just taken her position behind the gate counter. Karen Ali, a woman in her late 40s, wore her authority like a cheap, ill-fitting suit. Her helmet of blonde hair seemed sculpted by a wind tunnel, and her mouth was set in a permanent line of disapproval. With a practiced air of weary superiority, Karen surveyed the waiting area. After 22 years as a gate agent, her patience had worn thin. She viewed passengers not as individuals, but as a series of potential problems: oversized carry-ons, expired passports, and a general lack of common sense. She was the self-proclaimed guardian of the gate, the sole arbiter of who would be granted passage. Her eyes landed on Jalen, slouched in his seat, head bowed to his screen. She noted with disdain that he was likely plugged into earbuds, blasting whatever noise kids listen to these days. In her mind, he epitomized the entitlement and disrespect she had come to expect from his generation. Irritation began to fester within her. The boarding process for Flight 27B to Los Angeles was set to begin in 15 minutes. Christopher, ever the astute observer, noticed the sour expression on Karen's face. He had encountered countless individuals like her, wielding their minuscule power with a disproportionate sense of self-importance. He made a mental note to keep an eye on her. Approaching Jalen, he gently tapped him on the shoulder. Jalen looked up, his dark eyes momentarily unfocused before locking onto his father's face. Christopher smiled and signed. "Everything okay?" Jalen nodded, a quick motion. "Yeah, just texting Marcus. He's freaking out about the new Spider-Man trailer." Christopher chuckled, a low vibration that Jalen could feel more than hear. Tell him I said the red suit is a classic for a reason. He then spoke aloud, his voice calm and clear. We'll be boarding soon. Make sure your phone is charged for the flight. Jalen gave him a thumbs up, a smile still lingering on his lips. From her perch behind the counter, Karen watched the exchange, her irritation curdling into something more bitter. She saw what she wanted to see. A black man speaking to a boy who didn't seem to respond verbally. The narrative she wove in her mind was a tapestry of stereotypes and baseless assumptions. The storm was gathering, and Karen Ollie, with her helmet of hair and heart full of scorn, was about to become its unwitting victim. The announcement for pre-boarding crackled through the terminal speakers, calling for families with small children and passengers requiring special assistance. Jalen, lost in the vibrant world of his phone, didn't notice. Christopher, however, was already on his feet, his carry-on bag slung over his shoulder. He walked back to Jalen and gently touched his arm. Jalen looked up, brow furrowed in silent question. Christopher pointed toward the gate, then to the line forming. He signed. Time to go. Let's get settled. Jalen nodded, pocketing his phone and stretching his long limbs. He followed his father toward the boarding lane, his backpack casually slung over one shoulder. They joined the end of the pre-boarding line behind a young mother struggling with a stroller and a fussy toddler. From her command post behind the counter, Karen's eyes narrowed. Seeing Jalen and his father in the pre-boarding line ignited an irrational anger within her. She had a rigid, almost fanatical adherence to the rules, and in her mind, pre-boarding was a sacred privilege, not a free-for-all. As they approached the counter, the young mother ahead of them finally managed to collapse her stroller and move through. Now it was their turn. Christopher handed Karen their boarding passes, his expression neutral. "Good morning," he said politely. Karen snatched the boarding passes from his hand, her eyes flicking from the names on the tickets. Christopher Amir, Jalen Amir, to their faces and back again. "Pre-boarding is for passengers who need extra time or assistance," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She looked directly at Jalen, who was gazing past her, his attention fixed on the jet bridge. "Does he have a problem?" Christopher's calm demeanor didn't waver, but a warning bell chimed in the back of his mind. "My son is deaf," he stated simply, his voice even. "We pre-board to ensure he gets settled without the rush of the crowd, so I can explain anything he needs to know about the aircraft before it gets too chaotic." Karen's lips tightened into a sneer. She had heard it all before. Excuses, always excuses. "Deaf, huh?" she said, her voice laced with disbelief. She looked at Jalen again, who remained oblivious to her scrutiny. "He looks fine to me. Just another teenager with his head in the clouds. Probably got those earbuds in, blasting that rap music." A flicker of anger, hot and sharp, pierced through Christopher's composure. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "He is not wearing earbuds," he said, his voice dropping a decibel, losing its earlier warmth. "He is profoundly deaf. He has been since he was 3 years old." Karen let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like cracking ice. "Oh, I'm sure he is," she said sarcastically. "Everyone's got a story." Turning her full attention to Jalen, her voice rose in pitch and volume, as if speaking louder would somehow penetrate the wall of silence she refused to believe existed. "You," she barked, pointing a lacquered nail at him. "Pay attention when an adult is speaking to you. Take off your headphones." Feeling the vibrations of her sharp, percussive words and seeing the sudden shift in his father's posture, Jalen turned his head. He saw the woman's contorted face, her mouth moving in angry shapes. Glancing at his father, confusion filled his eyes. He sighed. "What's wrong? What is she saying?" Before Christopher could respond, Karen's frustration boiled over. The line was backing up, and people were starting to stare. She felt her authority being challenged, her carefully constructed world of rules and regulations mocked by this silent, disrespectful teenager. "I said listen to me," she shrieked, and then, in a shocking move that stunned the entire waiting area into silence, she leaned over the counter and slapped Jalen across the face. The sound was sharp, a sickening crack that echoed in the sudden quiet. Jalen stumbled back, hand flying to his cheek, disbelief and pain etched across his face. It wasn't just the physical sting. It was the public humiliation, the sheer unprovoked violence of the act. His eyes widened, filled with tears. For a moment, Christopher Amir froze. The world slowed, narrowing to the image of his son's tear-streaked face, the red mark blooming on his dark skin. The carefully constructed dam of his composure didn't just break, it evaporated. A cold, terrifying fury surged through him, the primal rage of a father whose child had been harmed. He stepped forward, radiating an aura of such intense menace that Karen, for the first time, felt a flicker of fear. The man standing before her was not the mild-mannered executive she had dismissed. His eyes, once calm and observant, were now like chips of obsidian, hard and unforgiving. "You," he said, his voice dangerously low, a growl vibrating with contained power. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Karen, emboldened by her act of aggression and the perceived validation of the staring crowd, scoffed. "Oh yeah? And who are you going to report me to?" "My manager." She laughed again, that same brittle sound. "I've been here 22 years, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." Christopher reached into his jacket pocket, his movements slow and deliberate. He pulled out not a wallet, but a sleek black phone. Tapping the screen a few times, he held it up, his thumb hovering over a single contact. The name on the screen was simple: Marcus Thorne, CEO, Aerolux Group. "No," Christopher said, his voice as cold as the grave. "I'm not going to report you to your manager." He looked directly into her eyes, letting the weight of his next words land with the force of a physical blow. "I'm going to have you fired, and then I'm going to have your manager fired. Then I'm going to call the CEO of this airline, a man I have on speed dial, and I'm going to tell him what you did to my son." He paused, allowing the silence to stretch thick with her dawning horror. "Because you see," he continued, the words dropping like stones into a silent pool, "my name is Christopher Amir, and I don't just fly on Aerolux Premier." Leaning in closer, his voice a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout, he added, "I own it." The revelation hit the air like a sonic boom. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Karen's face, once a mask of smug superiority, crumbled. The color drained from her cheeks, replaced by a ghastly pallor. Her jaw went slack, and her eyes, wide with terror, darted from Christopher's face to the airline's logo on the wall behind her, then back again. The pieces of her reality reassembled into a nightmare. The quiet, unassuming black man and the disrespectful deaf teenager were not just passengers. They were the architects of her world, and she had just committed an unforgivable sin at the very heart of their kingdom. The slap that had echoed through the terminal was now a thunderclap, signaling the catastrophic end of her career and the beginning of a karma so swift and brutal she couldn't possibly have imagined it. The silence that followed Christopher's declaration was a living thing, thick and suffocating. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic, panicked beat of Karen Ali's own heart in her ears. The name Christopher Amir hadn't registered at first. It was just a name. But a few frequent flyers in the crowd, those who read the business section or followed the aviation industry, exchanged wide-eyed glances. Whispers began to spread through the line, like a contagion. Amir, the Christopher Amir. Karen's mind, once a fortress of self-righteous indignation, was now a city under siege. Denial was her first line of defense. This had to be a bluff, a cruel, elaborate joke. "You're lying," she stammered, the words tumbling out, devoid of their earlier conviction. "You think you can just waltz in here and say something like that? I'm calling security." Reaching for the phone on the counter, her hand trembled so violently she could barely grasp the receiver. "Go ahead," Christopher said, his voice a blade of ice. "Call them. Call everyone. In about 90 seconds, your terminal manager, a Mr. Peterson, if I recall correctly, is going to get a call from my CEO. And then Mr. Peterson is going to come down here and personally escort you out of this building." Christopher hadn't taken his eyes off her. He hadn't raised his voice. He was simply stating facts, a sequence of events he had already set in motion. Turning his attention to his son, he saw Jalen still standing beside him, hand pressed to his cheek, tears silently tracking down his face. The confusion in Jalen's eyes had transformed into a dawning, horrified understanding. He had seen the slap replayed in the shocked faces of those around them. Christopher gently pulled Jalen into a one-armed hug, his large hand protectively cradling the back of his son's head. He signed against Jalen's back a private, comforting language amidst the public spectacle. "I've got you. You are safe. I am so sorry this happened." Jalen leaned into his father's strength, a sob finally shaking his slender frame. The humiliation was a raw, open wound. As if on cue, a man in a rumpled suit, face a mask of panic, sprinted through the terminal. David Peterson, the Terminal 4 operations manager, was living his worst nightmare in real time at Gate 27B. Clutching his work phone, still vibrating from the most terrifying call of his career, he gasped, "Mr. Amir, sir." Skidding to a halt before them, he completely ignored Karen, his eyes fixed on Christopher with pure, unadulterated terror. "Sir, I am so sorry. I came as soon as I heard. Is your son all right?" The sight of Peterson so utterly undone was the final nail in the coffin of Karen's denial. The blood drained from her face, leaving her a ghastly shade of white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. The reality of her situation crashed down on her like a tidal wave. "No, Mr. Peterson, he is not all right," Christopher said, his voice resonating with a dangerous calm that was far more intimidating than shouting. "Your employee assaulted my son in front of 100 witnesses." He gestured vaguely at the crowd of onlookers, all filming with their phones, a silent chorus of digital witnesses. "He is 16 years old and he is deaf." Peterson looked as though he might be physically ill. Turning to Karen, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief, he whispered, "Karen, what did you do?" Karen finally found her voice, but it was a pathetic, trembling thing. He wasn't listening. He was being disrespectful. I didn't know." "You didn't know?" Christopher cut in, his voice sharp as broken glass. "You didn't know you shouldn't put your hands on a child? You didn't know that you don't assault a passenger, regardless of who he is? Or is it that you only show basic human decency when you think someone is important?" He let the questions hang in the air, each one a fresh indictment. "Mr. Peterson," Christopher continued, his tone shifting from cold fury to icy command, "I want her employment with Aerolux terminated immediately. I want her escorted from the premises now." "Of course, sir. Right away," Peterson stammered, fumbling for his radio. "Security to Gate 27B. Security to 27B immediately." 2 uniformed airport security officers arrived within moments, their expressions grim. They had already been briefed by Peterson over the radio. Approaching the counter, their presence solidified the finality of the situation. Karen looked at them, then at Peterson, then at Christopher, her eyes pleading. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a desperate, dawning panic. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible. "I have a mortgage. I have kids in college. I've been here for 22 years. It was a mistake. You should have thought of your mortgage before you laid your hands on my son," Christopher said, his voice devoid of sympathy. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a person, but the embodiment of a casual cruelty he had fought against his entire life. 22 years doesn't give you a pass for assault. It makes it worse. You should have known better. The security officers moved behind the counter. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of them said, his voice firm but not unkind. Karen began to sob, her carefully constructed helmet of hair starting to come undone. "No, please, David. Don't let them do this," she begged, looking at her manager. Peterson wouldn't meet her eyes. He was too busy trying to salvage his own career. "I'm sorry, Karen. You have to go." As the officers gently but firmly led a now hysterical Karen away from the gate, a ripple of applause broke out among some passengers. The videos were already being uploaded, the story already being typed out in texts and social media posts. The digital karma was instantaneous. But for Christopher Amir, it wasn't enough. Firing her was just the beginning. The public humiliation she had inflicted on his son demanded a more personal, profound, and lasting form of justice. He looked down at Jalen, who was watching the scene unfold with wide, traumatized eyes. The hurt was still there, deep and raw. Christopher made a decision. This wouldn't just be about firing an employee. It would be a lesson. A lesson for Karen Ollie, for Aerolux, and for anyone who thought they could get away with abusing their power, however small. The immediate fallout was over. The long, hard reign of karma was about to begin, and Christopher Amir was going to be the one to command the storm. The firing was swift and brutal. Karen Ollie didn't even get to clean out her locker. She was escorted directly to an HR office, where a pre-written termination letter was handed to her, citing gross misconduct and assault. Her employee ID was deactivated, and her final paycheck details were coldly recited. She was informed that she was now banned from all Aerolux properties for life. She was then walked out a side door past the dumpsters, her 22-year career ending not with a gold watch, but with the clank of a closing fire door. But for Christopher Amir, this was merely administrative. It was the necessary first step, but it lacked the personal sting he felt was warranted. While a new gate agent, flustered and apologetic, boarded them onto the plane and into the plushest seats in first class, Christopher was already setting the next phase of his plan into motion. He didn't make a scene. He simply sat down, made sure Jalen was comfortable, and then quietly began to type on his phone. His first message was to his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Adrian. The instructions were simple and precise. Full background check on Karen Ollie. Terminated today at JFK. I want to know everything. Financials, family, social media, everything. And find me the best civil litigator in New York. I want them on retainer by the time we land. His next message was to his PR chief, a sharp-witted woman named Jessica. Do not release a corporate statement about the JFK incident. Not yet. I will handle the initial narrative personally. Monitor all social media. I want a full report on the spread of the videos, and get me the contact information for every passenger who was at that gate. As the plane ascended into the clouds, leaving the New York skyline behind, the digital storm on the ground was reaching hurricane force. The videos of the slap, filmed from a dozen different angles, had gone viral. #Slapgate and #Justice for Jalen were trending worldwide. Major news outlets picked up the story, first as a sensational piece of airport drama, then as Christopher Amir's identity was confirmed as a major business and social justice story. Karen Ollie arrived home to chaos. News vans were already parked on her quiet suburban street in Queens. Reporters camped out on her lawn, shouting questions at her as she stumbled from the taxi, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her husband, a plumber named Frank, met her at the door, confusion and anger etched on his face. "What the hell is going on, Karen? My phone's been blowing up. They're saying you hit a kid at the airport." Inside, her world continued to crumble. Her two sons, both in college, were calling, their voices a mixture of shame and disbelief. "Mom, is it true? It's all over campus. They're saying you slapped a deaf kid." The online vitriol was a tidal wave. Her Facebook profile had been found, and photos of her smiling on vacation were now plastered across the internet, interspersed with vicious comments. Her address, her phone number, her husband's business details, all had been doxed. Frank's plumbing business Yelp page was bombarded with one-star reviews. "Don't hire this company. The owner's wife assaults children." This was the immediate chaotic public karma. But Christopher's brand of justice was more methodical, more insidious. It was designed not just to punish, but to dismantle. 3 days later, the first lawsuit was filed. Not from Christopher Amir, the billionaire. That would have looked like a Goliath crushing a gnat. The lawsuit was filed on behalf of Jalen Amir, a minor, for assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawyer Christopher had hired, a legal pit bull named Benjamin Carter, was a master of the press conference. "This was not a simple mistake," Carter declared on the steps of the courthouse, his voice resonating with righteous indignation. "This was a hateful act of violence against a disabled child of color, and we will seek damages to the fullest extent of the law. We are not just seeking financial compensation. We are seeking a level of damages that will ensure Miss Ollie never forgets the harm she has caused." The figure they were seeking was astronomical, designed to be terrifying. $5 million. It was a sum Karen and Frank could never hope to pay in 100 lifetimes. Their modest home, their savings, their retirement accounts. Everything was now under threat. The next blow came from the community. A local activist group, hearing the story, organized a protest, not outside the airport, but outside Karen's home. For days, her street was filled with people chanting, holding signs with Jalen's face on them. "Hate has no home here," they shouted. Her neighbors, once friendly, now averted their gaze, closing their curtains as she passed. She had become a pariah in her own community. Then came the financial strangulation. Adrian's background check revealed the names of the banks that held her mortgage and car loans. Anonymous tips were sent to the risk assessment departments of these banks, highlighting the ongoing lawsuit and the immense reputational risk associated with her. Her mortgage, which was on a variable rate, was suddenly reviewed. The bank, citing a clause about moral turpitude in the fine print of her loan agreement, initiated foreclosure proceedings. Her car was repossessed in the middle of the night. Frank's plumbing business dried up completely. No one would hire him. The suppliers he had worked with for years suddenly canceled his lines of credit, citing unforeseen circumstances. He and Karen were now living off their rapidly dwindling savings, trapped in a house they were about to lose, with the specter of a multimillion-dollar lawsuit hanging over their heads. This was the hard karma Christopher Amir had envisioned. It wasn't just about losing a job. It was about losing everything. It was a systematic unraveling of a life designed to mirror the deep personal wound she had inflicted on his son. He wasn't just taking away her livelihood. He was taking away her home, her community, her peace of mind. He was making her feel as powerless, as publicly shamed, as Jalen had felt in that moment at the gate. And he was just getting started. The real twist of the knife was yet to come. A month after the slap, the Ali family was in ruins. They had moved into a cramped, dingy apartment in a less desirable part of town. Their comfortable suburban life was a distant memory. The foreclosure on their home was complete. Frank's business was defunct, and the strain had fractured their marriage, leaving a chasm of resentment and blame. Karen spent her days in a state of numb despair, jumping at every ring of the phone, terrified it was another lawyer, another reporter, another threat. The lawsuit loomed, a guarantee of financial ruin for the rest of their lives. It was then that Benjamin Carter, Jalen's lawyer, made his move. He contacted Karen's overwhelmed court-appointed legal aid attorney with an offer. "Mr. Amir is prepared to drop the civil suit," Carter explained, his voice smooth as silk over the phone. "All $5 million of it. He will also anonymously settle your outstanding debts related to the foreclosure and the repossession." A flicker of desperate, unbelievable hope ignited in Karen's lawyer. What's the catch?" he asked, suspicious of such a generous offer. "It's not a catch," Carter replied. "It's a condition, a non-negotiable condition. Mr. Amir has established a new charitable foundation, the Amir Foundation for Youth and Disability Advocacy. Its first major project is a national campaign against discrimination towards the deaf and hard of hearing. The campaign is called Listen with Your Eyes." The lawyer was silent, waiting. "The face of that campaign," Carter continued, "will be Karen Ali." The silence on the other end of the line was now one of pure shock. "You can't be serious," the lawyer finally managed to say. "Deadly serious," Carter confirmed. "Miss Ali will be required to work full-time for the foundation for a period of 2 years. She will be paid a minimum wage salary. Her job will be to travel the country speaking at schools, community centers, and corporate training events. She will tell her story. She will talk about her ignorance, her prejudice, and the consequences of her actions. She will be the living embodiment of the lesson Mr. Amir wants to teach. She will have to learn basic American Sign Language. She will have to work directly with the deaf community, the very people she scorned." The lawyer was speechless. It was a Machiavellian stroke of genius. It wasn't just punishment. It was a sentence of forced public penance. It was a 2-year-long act of ritual humiliation, dressed up as an opportunity for redemption. To refuse meant guaranteed financial annihilation. To accept meant becoming a walking, talking billboard for her own worst moment. Karen, when presented with the offer, collapsed. She sobbed for an hour, the sheer diabolical brilliance of it breaking what little spirit she had left. It was a prison without bars, a public flogging that would last for 730 days. But it was also a lifeline, a way out of the crippling debt and the endless legal battle. With no other choice, she accepted. The first event was a press conference announcing the Listen with Your Eyes campaign. Karen stood on a stage flanked by posters of Jalen's smiling face. She was pale, gaunt, and visibly trembling as she read from a prepared statement. "My name is Karen Ollie," she began, her voice cracking. "And a month ago, I assaulted a child because I was ignorant and prejudiced. I saw a deaf teenager, and I did not see a person. I saw a problem. I am here today to begin the long, difficult process of atoning for that action." Christopher and Jalen watched the press conference on a large screen in Christopher's home office. Jalen was quiet, his expression unreadable. For weeks, he had been withdrawn, the shadow of the event clinging to him. He had started seeing a therapist who was fluent in ASL, and slowly, he was beginning to process the trauma. Christopher signed. "Is this okay seeing her like this?" Jalen watched Karen on the screen for a long moment. He saw a broken woman stripped of her pride, forced to recount her shame over and over again. He didn't feel the satisfaction he thought he might. Instead, he felt a strange hollow pity. Turning to his father, he signed. "She's not the only one, Dad. There are Karens everywhere." It was a profound, simple truth, and it sparked an idea in Christopher's mind, a way to make this about more than just one woman's punishment. The Listen with Your Eyes campaign, with Karen as its reluctant figurehead, was a massive success. The story was compelling, a real-life drama of crime and punishment. Corporations eager to burnish their images lined up to partner with the foundation. Aerolux itself implemented a sweeping new disability awareness training program for all its employees, designed by leading experts in the deaf community. The program was named the Jan Initiative. Karen Ollie became a strange sort of celebrity. People would recognize her in airports, the very places she was now a pariah, and point. "That's her, the gate agent." She did her job mechanically at first, then with a weary resignation. She learned ASL, her fingers clumsy and slow. She sat in community centers and listened to the stories of deaf individuals, stories of daily slights and overt discrimination. For the first time, she was forced to see the world from a perspective other than her own. The true twist of the knife, however, came 6 months into her 2-year sentence. At a large corporate event for a major tech company in Silicon Valley, Karen was giving her standard speech. At the end, as always, there was a Q&A session. A young man in the back of the auditorium stood up. He signed his question, and an interpreter voiced it for her. "Miss Ollie," the man asked, "you speak of your ignorance, but do you ever think about the boy you slapped? Do you have any idea what his life is like?" Karen gave her practiced, sterile answer. "I think about him every day. I live with the shame of my actions, and I hope that he is healing." "He is," a new voice said, coming from the side of the stage. The spotlight shifted. Walking onto the stage, confident and poised, was Jalen Amir. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his posture straight, his eyes clear. Beside him was an ASL interpreter. Karen froze, her heart seizing in her chest. She hadn't seen him in person since that day at the airport. Jalen walked to the center of the stage and stood before the crowd. He looked at Karen, his expression not of anger, but of calm, steely resolve. He began to sign, his hands moving with newfound, fluid grace. The interpreter's voice filled the auditorium. "My name is Jalen Amir, and yes, my life has changed since that day. For a while, it was harder. I was scared. I was ashamed. I didn't want to go out in public." He paused, his eyes scanning the silent, captivated audience. "But then I realized something. Miss Ollie didn't just slap me. She gave me a gift. She showed the whole world what it's like for people like me. And now I have a voice louder than any shout." He turned to look directly at Karen. "I forgive you," he signed, the words voiced by the interpreter. "Not for you, but for me. I won't be a victim for the rest of my life. I'm taking my story back, and I'm going to use it to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." He then turned back to the audience. "My father's foundation has done great work, but the real work starts now. Today, I am announcing the launch of my own initiative funded by the foundation. It's a scholarship program that will send deaf and hard-of-hearing students to the best leadership and advocacy training programs in the country. We are going to create a new generation of leaders who will fight for our rights. A wave of thunderous applause erupted from the audience. In that moment, Karen Ollie became irrelevant. She was no longer the focus. The narrative had shifted entirely to Jalen. He had taken her punishment and transformed it into his triumph. The karma wasn't just that she had lost everything. It was that she had been forced to witness and even facilitate the rise of the very person she had tried to diminish. She had been the catalyst for his transformation from a quiet teenager into a powerful advocate. Her greatest humiliation had become his defining moment. This was the final, most exquisite twist of the knife. She had been rendered a footnote in his story. The 2 years of Karen Ollie's penance were not a straight line to redemption. They were a jagged, brutal descent into a self she never knew, followed by a slow, agonizing crawl back toward the light. The first 6 months were a private hell played out on a public stage. Each morning, she'd wake up in a different sterile hotel room, a Marriott in Dallas, a Holiday Inn in Des Moines, a Best Western on the outskirts of Cleveland. For a fleeting moment, she would forget. She'd see the generic floral print on the duvet and think she was on a vacation she couldn't remember planning. Then the weight of her reality would crash down, a physical pressure in her chest. She was Karen Ollie, the gate agent, the monster from the viral video. Her job was to be a ghost at her own haunting. She stood on stages under unflattering fluorescent lights, her own shame projected onto screens behind her in the form of news clips and unflattering screenshots. Her speech, meticulously crafted by Christopher Amir's PR team, was a self-flagellating script. "My name is Karen Ollie, and I am the face of casual prejudice," she would begin, her voice a monotone automaton. She spoke of her ignorance as a character flaw, her actions as a moral failing. The crowds, mostly corporate employees forced to attend mandatory DI training, listened with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They saw a specimen, not a person. Her mandatory American Sign Language classes were a particular form of torture. Her instructor, a patient but firm deaf man named Leo, would shape her clumsy, resistant fingers into the signs for "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please listen." He communicated with her through a writing pad, his sharp, neat script a constant reminder of the world she had refused to see. "Your hands are stiff, Karen," he wrote one afternoon. "Anger makes the hands stiff. You cannot speak a language of grace with fists." The observation struck her with the force of a physical blow. She went back to her hotel room and wept, not for her lost life, but for the sudden, terrifying realization that he was right. Her entire being was a clenched fist. The change began not in the lecture halls, but in the quiet, unscripted moments in between. In a church basement in rural Georgia, she was assigned to serve coffee and donuts at a small gathering for families with newly diagnosed deaf children. A young mother, her eyes red-rimmed and terrified, confessed her fear that her son would never have a normal life. Karen, expecting to feel nothing but the usual numb detachment, heard an echo of her own fears for her sons, her own anxieties about mortgages and college tuition. A fragile, unexpected thread of empathy unfurled within her. She found herself signing clumsily the few words of comfort she knew. "He is strong. You are strong." The mother, seeing the effort, the raw shame in Karen's eyes, simply nodded, a shared moment of humanity that transcended sound. In Chicago, she worked for a week at a summer camp for deaf teenagers. They were loud, vibrant, and mercilessly funny. They nicknamed her Gate Lady and performed elaborate, hilarious pantomimes of her viral video. It was brutal, but it was also honest. For the first time, she was not being handled with the careful, sterile pity of the hearing world. The teens treated her like a person, a deeply flawed and ridiculous person, but a person nonetheless. One evening, a 15-year-old girl named Maya sat with her by the campfire and taught her how to sign the lyrics to a pop song, their fingers dancing in the firelight. In that moment, beneath a canopy of stars, Karen felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, a simple, uncomplicated human connection. She was not the monster. She was just Karen, learning a new song. Her husband, Frank, finalized the divorce during her second year. He did it via email, Her sons called on holidays, their conversations strained and dutiful. The life she had been fighting to reclaim was gone, burned to ash. The irony was that only by losing everything she thought she wanted did she begin to find something she never knew she needed. The shame that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a quiet, weary acceptance. The karma had been brutal, a destructive storm that leveled her entire world. But in the flattened ruins, something new and fragile was beginning to grow. While Karen was navigating her personal purgatory, Jalen Amir was being reborn. The initial trauma of the slap had left deep wounds. For months, he suffered from nightmares and anxiety in public spaces. The world, which had once been a silent film he expertly navigated, now felt hostile, its vibrations threatening. His father's response, swift and overwhelming, was both a comfort and a burden. Christopher had wielded his power like a divine sword, smiting Jalen's tormentor. But in the quiet moments, Jalen wondered if that was true justice. His therapist, a wise deaf woman named Dr. Evans, helped him articulate this unease. "Your father fought your battle for you," she signed during one of their sessions. "Now you must decide what your own war is about." The launch of his initiative at the tech conference was the turning point. Stepping onto that stage, taking control of his own narrative was more empowering than any lawsuit or public shaming of Karen could ever be. He discovered he had a gift. He could take the complexity of his experience and distill it into a universal message of dignity and respect. He was not just a symbol. He was a strategist. He traveled not as a victim, but as a builder. With the vast resources of his father's foundation behind him, he funded scholarships, invested in accessible technologies, and created leadership programs. He met a young, brilliant coder from MIT, a deaf woman named Alani, who had developed a groundbreaking app that could translate spoken language into nuanced real-time ASL avatars. The Jalen Initiative funded her startup, and within 2 years, the technology was revolutionizing communication for millions. Christopher Amir watched his son's ascent with a profound mixture of pride and introspection. He had sought to avenge his son's pain, and in doing so, had unleashed a force of destruction on Karen Ali's life. He didn't regret protecting his family, but the sheer surgical totality of his response gave him pause. Had it been justice, or had it been the ultimate exercise of privilege? He saw the answer in Jalen. His son was wielding the same power, the power of the Amir name and fortune, not as a weapon, but as a tool. Jalen was building a world where a slap like that would be unthinkable, not just because the perpetrator might get caught, but because the underlying prejudice would be dismantled. Christopher began to shift the focus of the Amir Foundation. Guided by his son's vision, he moved from writing checks to investing in systemic change. He realized the legacy he wanted to leave wasn't a world-class airline, but a world that was more just, more accessible, a world his son was helping to create. 5 years after the slap, the grand ballroom of the New York Hilton was buzzing. It was the annual gala for the Jalen Initiative, an event that had become a major fixture on the city's philanthropic calendar. Jalen, now 21, stood at the podium. He was no longer the lanky, self-conscious boy from the airport. He was a man, poised and confident, his hands moving with an eloquence that captivated the entire room. He spoke of progress, of challenges, of the work still to be done. He didn't tell his story anymore. He didn't need to. His presence, his work, his very being was the story. After the speech, as he mingled with donors and politicians, he felt a familiar light tap on his arm. He turned. The woman before him was almost unrecognizable. Her hair was gray, pulled back in a simple, severe bun. She wore the plain black uniform of the hotel's catering staff. Her face was thin, etched with the fine lines of hardship and time. But the eyes, those eyes were the same, haunted but with a flicker of something new. It was Karen Ali. She was holding a tray of empty champagne glasses. For a terrifying second, the world tilted, and he was 16 again. The sting of her hand on his cheek, the terminal spinning around him. He saw her see the flicker of fear in his eyes, and a wave of profound shame washed over her face. She started to turn away, retreating back into the anonymity she had clearly chosen for herself. Something in him, a voice of deep, hard-won peace, made him reach out. He touched her arm gently. She froze. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the ruins of the life his father had dismantled. He saw the 2 years of public flagellation. But he also saw a woman who had survived it, a woman who was now serving champagne at a gala, celebrating the success of the boy she had assaulted. The karmic circle was so complete, so perfectly, brutally drawn that it almost defied belief. There was no anger left in him. There wasn't even pity. There was only the quiet, stunning finality of it all. Karen lifted her hands, her movements hesitant, rusty, but clear. "Your speech was beautiful," she signed. "You're doing good work. I am glad." The last sign for glad, or happy, was shaky but sincere. Jalen searched her face. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was not making an excuse. She was simply stating a fact. It was the most honest communication they had ever shared. He brought his own hands up, his movements fluid and sure. "Thank you," he signed. He paused, then added, "It is good to see you, Karen." Using her name was a conscious choice. It was an acknowledgement that she was no longer just a gate agent, the specter from his past. She was a person whose life was now irrevocably, bizarrely interwoven with his own. A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path through the faint makeup on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of self-pity, but of release. To be seen, to be called by her name, by him, was an absolution she had never dared to seek. She gave him a small, trembling nod of acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the orchestrated chaos of the gala, just another worker in the background of a world she had unintentionally helped create. Jalen watched her go, the echoes of the slap finally fading, not into silence, but into the vibrant, purposeful hum of the room, the sound of his own life's work. The karma had been more than a simple act of revenge. It had been a transformative fire, destructive and creative in equal measure. And from the ashes, 2 entirely new legacies had been born. That right there is a story that goes beyond a simple firing. It's a masterclass in karma. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about a profound life-altering reckoning that changed everyone involved. Jalen's journey from a humiliated teenager to a powerful global advocate shows that our worst moments can become the source of our greatest strength. It's a stark reminder that the people we dismiss, the ones we think have no power, might just have the ability to change the world. What did you think of the hard karma Karen received? Was it justice, or was it too much? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you speechless. Thank you for listening.